Hi, this is Felipe Osorio, and welcome to Second Earth Alternative. Alright, I can't tell you how excited I am for not just this episode, but the series of episodes that are about to come out. The last few days, I just have to admit, has been some of the most research intensive, some of the most discoveries I have ever discovered in all of my years of research, and it all has to do with Atlantis. There are absolutely amazing discoveries. For example, the fort that Bright Insight was talking about. We actually found a second one, and not just a second one, but we know exactly what that is. We ended up finding the exact architecture for what that represents, and I think the results might actually surprise you. So, and there's a new finding that we discovered with Herodotus' map that I'm telling you, this is absolutely gonna blow your mind. But if you clicked on this episode, obviously you're not here to see Atlantis. You obviously want to know what we have to say about the black hole. So, pretty big news for astronomy, a big event in human history. The first time that humans have actually captured a black hole. So, if you haven't seen the images from NASA, I gotta tell you, I'm not trying to toot my horn here. I'm just gonna be straight up with you guys. This was something that I actually predicted. I have a friend who has an astronomy website. I'll try to drop the link below if you guys want to check it out. And I actually told them, I said, based on everything that I've ever learned, I kind of had this inclination that the black hole had to look like a hexagon. And that's exactly what I told my friend. He can confirm it for you. And sure enough, that's kind of what we see. Now, if you guys haven't checked this out, let me show you what I'm talking about. So if we zoom in into this black hole, right away you kind of see like a rectilinear form to the black hole. But what really amazed me, right, was when we started playing with the channel mixers just to see what the different wavelengths of light were doing as it was being essentially broken down into this void. So let's go ahead and just put a quick channel filter here. We'll go adjustments, channel mixer, and check out what happens to the black hole as we start playing with the channels here. You kind of see that shape that is kind of protruding out of this black hole, and let's see how deep we can get this. There you go. You can kind of see the shapes a little bit better with this type of channel mixing configuration. But I wanted to really show you what happens, because as we zoom in, right, and the reason why I thought this might look like a hexagon is for various reasons. One of them, Saturn's poles, if you've never seen, has a hexagon shape, to the surprise of many scientists. There are some scientists, however, who are not so surprised, one of them being Richard C. Hoagland. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up Richard C. Hoagland is because he had been one of the biggest proponents of a physics called Hyperdimensional Physics, which has to do with the idea of rotating electromagnetic masses that essentially creates like a torque-like shape, not too different from Earth's magnetosphere. And the idea that such rotating fields actually can induce energy from the ethos of the universe. This is kind of the basis of this theory. And essentially it kind of manifests in these three-dimensional Platonic-like solids, which often has a base of a hexagon. And you see that with the star tetrahedral. And it makes me wonder if the Star of David was actually a symbol that perhaps had Kabbalah roots, that had roots to this idea of sacred geometry. So the idea of a hexagon being part of our sacred geometry is not a new idea. It's actually been talked about in ancient scriptures related to the ancient Jewish Kabbalah beliefs. But let me show you what happens here when we start zooming in here. And I'm going to increase the contrast real quick because I want you guys to see what's happening inside this, because it's as if we're not just getting one hexagonal type shape, if that's what you want to consider, but inside you can almost see as if there's rotating forms of different other shapes also present, almost like a funnel of shapes, right? Now here's how it breaks down, and you're not going to believe this, but using the exact same intuition, I was actually writing to my physics professor at the time that I believe that if you were to enter a black hole, that at the other end you would have to go into a different universe. And if you're a physicist or if you're familiar with science, you know that that was one of Stephen Hawking's last discoveries. But somehow, through just basic intuition, I had a sense that this was the truth, that this was the reality. So why would I think like this? Well, basically, there's two models that I'm kind of mixing and applying together. One of them is called the Holographic Universe. I'm not sure if you've read this book. Absolutely amazing, but it kind of talks about how the entire universe can be essentially graphed from a 2D model into a 3D space, almost to say that the amount of information bits that creates all the three-dimensional space that we live in this universe, that within the constraints of our mathematical understanding of our laws of physics, that there is enough digits for all of this to be mapped just from a 2D surface. And I know this sounds really crazy, right? But there's one thing about this, about this idea of having a fractal scalar model that makes pentagons and hexagons similar. Okay, so what do I mean by scalar models? Okay, so what I'm talking about really is the ability for a single ratio to apply to multiple constructions at different scalar. So let me show you a quick fun example real quick. Very quickly, tell me what this looks like to you. Now, if you thought it looked like something like this, well, that's not exactly the answer. Let me show you what I mean. That is a human year. So as you can see, even the smallest parts of a human year can look like human anatomy in the most aggregate, the most general form. And the reason why I'm saying that hexagon and pentagon have shared qualities, it has to do with the scalar fractal nature of the universe. Essentially that the universe can be scaled at different ratios, creating different manifestations of realities or different forms or constructions, but all based on the same model, essentially. Now, if you were to think of the holographic universe theory, that the universe, kind of like the Matrix, might have been coded from a 2D source, well, what shapes, what ratios allow you to essentially transition from a 2D to a 3D level without much added information? One of them would be a pentagon. Because essentially what a pentagon is, it's a golden ratio triangles broken down into itself, which essentially creates the shape of a pentagon, and you can essentially break this pentagon infinitum to infinity just using this simple ratio, just creating a whole bunch of golden ratio triangles. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. Here is the center of a pentagon, and you can see how the star, right? The center of the star is a pentagon. But this is a 2D shape, correct? This was just created from one ratio, the golden ratio. Now check this out. If I simply start shading these planes, let's say I shade them with my consciousness, my perception, right? Check this out. Do you see that? Suddenly we got a 2D shape that has transformed into a 3D object. And that's the thing that is so interesting about a hexagon. You see, like the pentagon and like the golden ratio with this Fibonacci sequence where you have 1 plus 1, which is the same elements, then interacting in a way that they then become different, which is the process of addition. 1 plus 1 equals 2. Now you have a different form. So take that different form, add it to the original form. 2 plus 1 equals 3. 3 plus 2, 5. You keep adding. That is essentially the Fibonacci sequence. The Fibonacci sequence, if you don't know, breaks down and creates the golden ratio. Any number in the Fibonacci sequence divided by the previous number is something that's very proximate to the golden ratio, and the higher you go in the sequence, the closer you get to the golden ratio. So if you think about it mathematically in the most basic form, it's as if you're taking two of the same elements, changing it or altering in a way that it becomes something different. And I think that this is how our universe was essentially programmed, that it was a 2D universe that through the process of consciousness, whatever consciousness is, I'm not going to try to pretend like I know what it is, but something related to consciousness allowed us to take that 2D form and essentially, as you can see here, take a 2D form and make a 3D projection out of it. Sounds really complicated, right? And I know this, I'm oversimplifying a lot of different concepts in physics, but the main point I'm trying to make here is that there are certain shapes and there are certain numbers that will essentially iterate itself into a 3D form. Hexagons also do this. So let me show you what's going on here. Okay, so here is a simple shape of a hexagon, right? Now look what happens, okay, when I simply overlay another 2D hexagonal shape. In fact, I'm overlaying the exact same shape onto itself, just churned a little bit. So let's take a look what happens. You see that? So suddenly you get all these 3D looking shapes. The more I fill it, the more the shapes change, and the perception of the shapes change, and the direction of the shapes change just by changing the opacity of the fill. Even cooler, watch what happens when I start moving the layer, okay? Check this out. Do you see how it's as if the entire world, 3D world, is being manifested before our eyes simply by overlaying two 2D shapes related with the hexagon? Now, if you want to make this even more interesting, let's go ahead and inverse this and check this out. Now, granted, we're just taking two 2D images, overlaying each other. Maybe we can inverse the color values or the luminosity values, but what is essentially being created just by moving these two 2D layers is almost an entire projection of a 3D world before our eyes. And in a sense, I feel like if the universe was broken down how the holographic universe discusses, if the universe was like the Matrix, essentially a form of a projection, a computer program per se. Well, computer programs are going to be pretty efficient, right? They're going to be as efficient as you can. So if you can project a 3D world into a 2D surface or something that carries 2D information, that maximizes your efficiency for a given world that you're creating. And perhaps that's what our universe is all about. And I thought that if we were to reach a black hole, that in that black hole, that's where space and time essentially rips itself and shreds itself into small bits. So in the process of it essentially deconstructing itself into the very basic units of space-time itself, my natural inclination is that this thing would have to break down into the most basic shapes that allow it to transcend from a 2D to a 3D world, essentially a hexagon or perhaps a pentagon. So, and I'm sure Richard C. Hoagland would be jumping right now after seeing this picture, because it essentially helps support his idea of a hyperdimensional universe, as well as did the hexagon shapes on top of Saturn. Now, I'm not sure exactly what is creating that. I can only surmise that Saturn has a very heavy gravitational pull, has a lot of winds, has a very strong electromagnetic field. So all of that contributing with each other, you have a rotating electrical sphere. Perhaps that's somehow manifesting different dimensional connections, or I'm not really sure how to word it, but just in a sense kind of slicing through the fabric of space-time itself. Okay, so I know this is getting a little bit wordy here, so maybe I should just show you guys some images to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about with this number, this golden ratio, and how it kind of manifests itself into the universe. So this is a general golden ratio spiral that I kind of altered here and there by overlaying the spirals and then changing the color values. But what I found so interesting about this, right, is if you take this golden ratio set of spirals and you start messing with the luminosity, let me show you what starts happening here. Check this out. As we increase it, right, look how that pink part of the picture starts to look like a fingerprint, almost like a thumb, right? Like somebody's ID, their identity. Now, the reason why I'm saying identity is because look what happens when you go the other direction. Okay, so I'm gonna pull the highs over here and check this out. Let me zoom out for a second so you guys can see the full transformation. Are you seeing that? I mean, are you kidding me? So we go from a fingerprint in one end, and I said ID because as we go to the other ends of the values, this fingerprint starts to look like an eye. Not just any eye, but actually kind of like a reptilian eye with scales on the side. It's kind of spooky. But the point is, the simple ratio, just transforming certain values, will create drastically different shapes, some of them related to the very physiology that we have. So let me show you another example of this amazing golden ratio transformation. So this is a similar spiral. It's actually the inverse color values of what I had before. So let's take a look at what happens when we increase the values of this one. So as I start increasing, look at this. Now, I don't know what you think this looks like, but to me, it starts looking like almost like a star, or maybe you can say an exploding supernova, something that's essentially emanating energy from an inner source. Now, if we turn it to the other value, to the other way, look what starts happening here. Now, this is interesting because it starts, what I'm seeing here is a transformation from something that looks almost spherical to something that starts going the other way, almost as if it's entering into a form of a black hole. Now follow me for a second because this gets even more interesting. Now if we were to just take the black and white version, okay, of the same spiral, let's take a look at this transformation. And mind you, all of this is created from a single number, a single ratio. But as we expand, it takes on that exploding star shape, right? But look what happens when we go to the other values, when we start decreasing the values. Aha. And there, with a singularity, a single point over here, we're able to create something that starts not just looking like a black hole, but a black hole with almost three-dimensional shapes protruding from the outside. And let's do that one more time. And look how amazing that looks as I start scanning. I mean, it looks like a movie, right? It looks like something that is a lot more complicated than a single number, a single ratio. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the reason why I believe that there was a universe that would be essentially have to be launched on the other side of a black hole is because I believe in this idea of duality, that the whole universe is essentially pulled into two polar opposites. It has to do with the idea of also the Fibonacci sequence, that at a certain point it started as two of the same elements, 1 and 1, and something happened, which is the process of addition, which generated a different element, 2. Which then could be added with the original element to create 3, and so forth to create the rest of the Fibonacci sequence. This is a lot of conjecture, a lot of just simplified intuitive thinking, but it made a lot of sense to believe that one of the initial starting points of the universe would have had to been this separation of 1 into 2, which essentially creates the Fibonacci sequence. Now, how do you take the same element and make it different? Why don't you spin it? Just spin the thing. Because if you spin the exact same thing, well, it's going to have to spin a certain direction. When you're talking about spinning in a given axis, there's only 2 directions that it can spin. It can either spin left or right. That's one of the ways that they separate different electrons from each other, is how they spin. I mean, the whole idea of quantum entanglement is about electron spins. It's about the fact that you can get 2 particles to spin the same direction almost simultaneously without the barrier of space-time affecting it. Could the spin of electrified system essentially be the beginning source that allowed the same thing, the same whatever it was, to differentiate itself from itself? That it goes from left to right. Once you start spinning an object that has to go one direction, that means that there's going to be an object of an opposite direction. Meaning you take the same object and you've made it into something different by just spinning it. So if the universe can be thought like the Milky Way, like this giant spinning Milky Way, my guess would have been that at the other side, there would have to be a new universe spinning in the opposite direction, something that would essentially offset the universe itself in a way that could almost cancel itself out if the universe was symmetrical. Now, I think that observations show that the universe might be slightly asymmetrical, something that scientists are still kind of trying to figure out. So I don't want to speak more about that, but that's just the general concept that allowed me to believe that there was a hexagon shape, because those are the shapes that transcend 2D to 3D, and the idea of golden ratios, how that all interplays with sacred geometry, and essentially possibly the formation of our entire universe. So if you're curious to see more videos, just know that I'll be publishing a video possibly every 12 hours, starting right now, about Atlantis. Now, I honestly promise you that in 10 years of research, I've never ever uncovered anything so big as what I'm about to show in the next few episodes. So please stay tuned. If you have not subscribed, definitely subscribe and hit that notification so that you will get notified for these very groundbreaking videos. Look, we're talking about figuring out human history for the last 12,000 years. We're talking about a theory that essentially makes all these anomalies suddenly fit. We're talking about Atlantis, we're talking about the Recon structure, we're talking about the map of Herodotus, we're talking about so many things, so many discoveries. I think we've even figured out what the Atlanteans used to look like. So if you guys are curious, I'll be posting some notifications on our Facebook page. If you have not checked it out, you can check it out. And yeah, hopefully I will see you guys soon. This is Felipe Osorio, signing out.